Welcome to Sickcast, brought to you by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Santbir Singh. I'm a research associate at the Sikh Research Institute and a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology at York University. The life of Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale has personally inspired me throughout my life. However, I am also aware that he is a complicated figure for some. Around this time of year, especially when we commemorate the June 1984 Kalukara and Battle of Amritsar, certain criticisms of Sant Jarnail Singh's actions, decisions, and choices often arise. In this article, I decided to examine the major criticisms and critiques of Sant Jarnail Singh and place them within the framework of Sikh history and traditions. Writing this piece allowed me to delve deeply into an important chapter of recent Sikh history. Although the article is lengthy and dense, I hadn't planned on recording it. However, I am doing so due to requests Sikri has been receiving. I hope readers and listeners will find it valuable to understand Sant Jarnail Singh's actions within the context of a Sikh ethos. Why was Bhindranwale there? Sant Jarnail Singh in the Harmandir Sahib complex. Published Tuesday, 4th June 2024. Condemnation of the Indian government's actions in the June 1984 Kalukara is fairly universal from almost all segments of the Sikh community. However, some believe the Sant Jarnail Singh Khalsa Bhindranwale, the Sant, and those he led are responsible, at least partially, for what occurred 40 years ago in Amritsar Sahib. As popular and lauded as the Sant is in segments of the Sikh community, he is also a source of discomfort for many. The same questions and critiques are repeated year after year. These criticisms come from many sides and are voiced by drastically different groups of the Sikh populace. With the recent rise of Nihang culture among young Sikh men, there has been renewed and increased vitriol in the criticism of the Sant's choices. This essay will contextualize the Sant's actions through the lens of Sikh history, placing him and the events of June 1984 into a Sikh framework. The critiques. The primary criticism of Sant Jarnail Singh regarding 1984 are 1. Why was he in the Harmandir Sahib complex in the first place? Why had he made it his base of operations? 2. Why was he personally located in Akal Takht Sahib? 3. Why was he and those he led armed with weapons? 4. Why was the complex so heavily fortified? 5. Considering the complex's sanctity and historical importance, why did he not surrender to the Indian government and army once it became clear the attack would happen? 6. There has been a new question recently. Why did Sant Jarnail Singh not fight the government's forces at a different location? Why did the battle have to happen in the Harmandir Sahib complex and not, for example, on the outskirts of Amritsar or at Anandpur Sahib? There are also critiques that Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was too harsh in his language, precisely 2 instances where he threatened the lives of Hindus. Many of these criticisms are not new and were first voiced before the Kalukara happened. They were part of a campaign of demonization that the Indian government and press carried out in the lead-up to the June 1984 attack on Harmandir Sahib. The anti-Sikh propaganda was what was used to justify the attack. In the decades since the Kalukara, these criticisms have continued and are oft repeated. This paper is an attempt to address all of these critiques systematically. The Morcha tradition. Why was Sant Jarnail Singh in the complex at all? Why had he made the complex his headquarters? The answer to these questions lie in the tradition of morchas that began in 1920. A morcha, a Sikh term meaning a position on a battlefield, had come to mean a non-violent protest movement designed to pressure governments to achieve a goal. The morcha tradition started in 1920 with the beginning of the Akali movement, when Sikhs began to organize the liberation of Gurdwaras and other Sikh institutions from British government-backed Mahant control. The morchas continued for 5 years until the Sikh Gurdwara Act was passed in 1925. After partition in 1947, Sikhs began to organize again, this time for Punjabi Suba, a state where the Punjabi language could be safeguarded. The Punjabi Suba Morcha was an epic movement in which tens of thousands of Sikhs gave themselves up for arrest to pressure the government to create a Punjabi-speaking state. The Punjabi Suba Morcha was first led by Master Tara Singh and then by Sant Fateh Singh, the leaders of the Shromani Akali Dal, SAD, the preeminent Sikh political party. Since the 1920s, and perhaps even earlier, it had become government policy not to enter the Harmandir Sahib complex and to treat the confines of the complex as a Sikh sovereign space. This policy had been broken by the Indian government once, in 1955, when the Punjab police entered the complex and arrested and beat Sikh activists during the Punjabi Suba Zindabad Morcha. In the aftermath of this incursion, the then Chief Minister of Punjab, Bhim Sen Sachar, came personally to the complex and promised that the government would never again enter it. How was the Punjabi Suba Morcha carried out? In a tradition developed from the earlier morchas of the 1920s, a jatha would come to the Harmandir Sahib complex. They would first go to Harmandir Sahib and bow down to Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Then they would go to Akal Takht Sahib, where they would do an ardas, a supplicatory prayer. In this ardas, they would state their intention to give themselves up for arrest, and they would promise in front of the Guru that they would remain peaceful. They would then go to a large Gurdwara in the complex called Manji Sahib Diwan Hall, where political speeches would occur. After listening to speeches, they would leave the complex and give themselves up for arrest. This process would then continue day after day until the morcha was successfully concluded. During the Punjabi Suba Morcha, arrest warrants were issued for activists and leaders associated with the movement. Because of the government's policy of not entering the Harmandir Sahib complex, those leaders and activists with arrest warrants issued in their name could stay within the complex, where the government could not enter and arrest them. It was also tradition for the leadership of the morcha to remain within the complex while the morcha was ongoing. In the complex, they could organize and plan without fear of government interference. This tradition would be replicated from 1982 to 1984 during the Tanami of the morcha, of which Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was the co-leader. The Tanami of the morcha. By 1982, Sant Jarnail Singh was growing more popular in the Sikh community. He had become one of the most preeminent leaders in the Panth. In July 1982, Bhai Amrik Singh, the Sant's right-hand man and the head of the All India Sikh Students Federation, as well as senior Taksal figure Baba Tara Singh, were arrested on fabricated charges. The arrest of these two Sikhs, along with the previous harassment and arrest of other Sikh activists associated with the Damdami Taksal, led the Sant to come to the Harmandir Sahib complex on 19 July 1982 and start a morcha, which he named the Dharmiyad Morcha, or DYM, for freeing of Sikh political prisoners, primarily by Amrik Singh and Baba Tara Singh. As with previous Bantik morchas, he started the morcha by doing an ardas at Akal Takht Sahib. The Sikh masses immediately supported the DYM. The Shromani Akali Dal, which had been searching for political relevance, saw the massive support being given to Sant Jarnail Singh and decided to launch a morcha as well, not only for the release of prisoners, but for the implementation of the Anandpur Sahib resolution. Sant Jarnail Singh humbly decided that the best course forward was for the community to have one morcha under the leadership of the Shromani Akali Dal and its presidents, Sant Harchan Singh Longowal. On August 4th, 1982, Sant Jarnail Singh merged his morcha with the Akali Dals, and the Dharmiyad Morcha was declared the joint morcha of both Sant Jarnail Singh and the Shromani Akali Dal. While Sant Harchan Singh Longowal was officially the leader of the morcha, aka Dictator Sahib, in practice both Longowal and Sant Jarnail Singh shared the leadership of the morcha. Sant Harchan Singh Longowal and Sant Jarnail Singh, as well as other Panthik leaders including Gurcharan Singh Tora, Prakash Singh Badal, Surjit Singh Barnala, and others, made an ardas at Akal Takht to start the Morcha. They vowed to the Guru that they would not end the Morcha until it was successful. This success was defined as the release of Sikh political prisoners and the implementation of the Anandpur Sahib resolution. This ardas is integral in understanding why the Sant remained in the Harmandir Sahib complex. Since the 1920s, Bantik precedents have called for the leadership of a Morcha to remain in the Harmandir Sahib complex while the Morcha was ongoing. As co-leader of the Tarmil Morcha, which was ongoing at the time, Sant Jarnail Singh followed the tradition of the preceding 6 decades, remaining in the Harmandir Sahib complex. This explains why Sant Jarnail Singh was inside the complex, but why was he personally located in Akal Takht Sahib? To understand that, we must delve a little deeper into the history of the Tarmil Morcha. Sant in the Akal Takht Sahib. For the majority of the Tarmil Morcha, Sant Jarnail Singh was based out of room 32 of Guru Nanak Nivas, one of the rest houses within the Harmandir Sahib complex. His mornings were spent giving and listening to speeches in Gurdwara Manji Sahib Diwan Hall. His afternoons were often spent on the roof of the Langar building, where he met with various officials and well-wishers. He would sleep and rest in room 32. By late 1983, the relationship between Sant Jarnail Singh and Sant Jarnail Singh Longowal had deteriorated. The Akali Dal had grown increasingly uncomfortable with how central Sant Jarnail Singh was to the movement. In addition, the SAD was negotiating with the government of Indira Gandhi and was willing to make serious concessions. Sant Jarnail Singh, holding the ardas he had done at Akal Takht Sahib as paramount, refused to back down on the promise made before Guru Granth Sahib and the Sikh Panth. The DYM, the Tarmil Morcha, would only end when the Anandpur Sahib resolution was implemented. The Babbar Khalsa, a militant movement made up of members of the Akhand Kirtani Jatha, which was primarily involved in bringing to justice Nirankari leadership, was also based in the complex at the time. At the urging of the Shromani Akali Dal and Sant Harchan Singh Longowal, on 15 December 1983, the Babbars, a relatively small organization compared to Sant Jarnail Singh's movement, which was made up of both members of the Damdami Taksal and the All India Sikh Students' Federation, came to room 32 and demanded that Sant Jarnail Singh leave. Sant Jarnail Singh's followers were incredulous at the demand, especially since there were so few Babbars demanding this. But Sant Jarnail Singh was a firm believer that Sikhs should not fight Sikhs, especially within the Harmandir Sahib complex, and so without argument he left Guru Nanak Nivas. Longowal and the Akali leadership had pushed the Babbars to remove Sant Jarnail Singh because they wanted him out of the DYM. But they forgot how strong Sant Jarnail Singh's commitment was to the promises that he had made. He simply would not break his word. If he said he would remain in the complex until the Morcha was successful, he would remain in the complex until the Morcha was successful. If the Akalis wanted him out of Guru Nanak Nivas, then so be it. He would leave Guru Nanak Nivas. But in a brilliant maneuver that outflanked the Akalis, Sant Jarnail Singh did not leave the complex when pushed out. Instead, he moved his base to the heart of the complex, to the Akal Takht Sahib. Sant Jarnail Singh was well aware of Bantik history. In the 1960s, Sant Fateh Singh had also stayed in the Akal Takht Sahib during the Punjabi Suba Morcha. So there was a precedent for the leader of a Morcha to be within the building of the Akal Takht. By acquiescing to the demands of the Babbars and the Shromani Akali Dal, but then repositioning himself within the seat of Sikh social and political power, Sant Jarnail Singh was sending a bold message. Not only would he not give up, but he had shown that his commitment to the movement was unparalleled, and that he would not, through any pressure, leave the complex before the movement was successful. When criticized that he was somehow disrespecting the Akal Takht by living inside of it, Sant Jarnail Singh was quick to remind Akali supporters that their own previous president, Sant Fateh Singh, had also stayed within Akal Takht Sahib. This is why in June of 1984, Sant Jarnail Singh was within the Akal Takht Sahib when the Indian Army launched its attack. Here, We have an explanation for why Sant Jarnail Singh was not only in the complex, but also within Akal Takht. We also have a reason why Sant Jarnail Singh did not leave the complex. An ardas made before the Guru is a sacred bond, one that a Sikh would rather die than break. There are plenty of anecdotes from Sikh history that demonstrate the strength of a Sikh's commitment to ardas. One is a morcha to take back Nankana Sahib in 1921. When Bhai Lakshman Singh led a jatha to Nankana Sahib to free it from Mahants, he and his jatha had first done ardas in front of Guru Granth Sahib that they would remain peaceful, regardless of what the Mahants did to them. Upon entering the grounds of Nankana Sahib, Mahant Narayan Das's hired thugs began to attack the Sikhs. Having made a vow of non-violence before the Guru, the Sikhs refused to fight back, and over 250 Sikhs were slaughtered as a result, in an incident now known as Saka Nankana Sahib. Bhai Lakshman Singh himself was burnt alive, but he and his fellow Akalis refused to break their promise. The ardas of a Sikh is unbreakable. Having explained the critiques of why Sant Jarnail Singh was in the complex, and why he did not leave, let us now turn to why Sant Jarnail Singh was so heavily armed and why he and his followers had fortified the complex. The nature of the Harmandir Sahib complex. Violence in and around the Harmandir Sahib complex is not unique. The complex has been the site of many conflicts throughout Sikh history in the post-Guru Hargobind Sahib period. If anything, long periods of peace at the site are rare. Lack of violence is the exception. The source of this conflict can be tied directly to the Sikh principle of Miri Piri, a central component of the Sikh worldview. Miri Piri, simply put, is the idea that the Guru, and by extension the Sikh people, are fully sovereign in all realms and spaces, both in what are traditionally considered spiritual areas and those more temporal fields such as society and politics. The Sikh worldview is holistic, not one that divides or creates duality, so that spiritual and socio-political sovereignty are not oppositional forces but are instead intermixed, immersed, if you will, within each other. In the post-Baba Banda Singh Bahadur period, when Amritsar grew in prominence and became the capital of the Sikhs, it was never just the spiritual center of the Sikh people, but also their socio-political and military headquarters as well. In fact, the very idea of a spiritual capital, removed from socio-political concerns, is an anathema to Sikhi, an impossibility. The very architecture of the Harmandir Sahib complex is a testament to the integrated nature of Sikh sovereignty. Uniquely in Sikh history, the Harmandir Sahib complex is a work of three subsequent Guru Sahibs. Guru Ram Das Sahib, the fourth Nanak, built the Amrit Sarovar, or Pool of Immortality. The next Guru, Guru Arjan Sahib, built the Harmandir Sahib within that pool. The sixth Guru, Guru Hargobind Sahib, built the Akal Takht facing Harmandir Sahib. This purposeful and thoughtfully planned out complex was built to reflect core Sikh principles and ideals. Harmandir Sahib was built as a palace for the wisdom of Guru Granth Sahib. The building was inaugurated when the original recension of Guru Granth Sahib, the Adbir, was completed and reverentially placed inside of it. The unique architecture of the building, with its four doors, symbolized that this was an institution open to the whole world, not just Sikhs, as the wisdom of Gurbani was meant for all of humanity. In fact, according to some traditions, a non-Sikh, the famous Sufi saint Sai Mia Mir, was the one who placed the foundation stone of the building. The Akal Takht, properly known as Takht Akal Bunga Sahib, was built by Guru Hargobind Sahib as a very different institution from the Harmandir Sahib. Whereas the Harmandir was constructed by the masses of Amritsar, Sikhs and non-Sikhs alike, Akal Takht was a very Panthic space from even before its inception. In fact, according to Sikh tradition, Guru Hargobind Sahib himself fashioned and baked the bricks for the original structure, with only the most preeminent Sikhs of the time, Baba Buddha and Bhai Gurdas, being allowed to actually build the Takht. Why the difference? Because the Akal Takht, regardless of how it is now treated, was never meant to be a Gurdwara. Harmandir Sahib was designed to be open to the masses so that the fragrant wisdom of Bani could spread to all. On the other hand, Akal Takht was a space for only those who had committed themselves to the Sikh Panth. This was due to the nature of the institution. The Akal Takht was where Guru Hargobind Sahib made social, political, judicial, and military decisions. When Guru Hargobind Sahib relocated to Kiratpur, the sovereign authority of the Guru travelled with him. Thus, the Akal Takht was tied to the Guru. It was a manifestation of the Guru's divine sovereignty, granted by Akal Purkh, the timeless being, to Guru Nanak Sahib, and passed down from Guru to Guru through the generations. This is why at Kiratpur Sahib there is a Takht Court Sahib, which is where Guru Hargobind Sahib, Guru Har Rai Sahib, and Guru Harkrishan Sahib all made their socio-political, judicial, and military decisions. When Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib built the town of Chak Nanaki, he built a new Takht known as Akal Bunga, where he made his socio-political decisions. When Guru Gobind Singh Sahib later changed the name of Chak Nanaki to Anandpur Sahib and built the 5 forts of the city, he turned the fort of Ankadher, Kesgad, into his Akal Takht, his throne, where he governed. Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, who was never able to establish Khalsa rule in central Punjab fully, kept the capital of the Khalsa at Mukhlispur, in the modern state of Haryana. But after his martyrdom, the Sikhs needed a central location to organize the community. The leaders of the community after Banda Singh Bahadur's death, the mothers, Mata Sundari and Mata Sahib Devankor, astutely, in their wisdom, directed the community to gather at Amritsar Sahib at the Harmandir Sahib complex, and it is from there that the community began to develop itself. Just as it had in Guru Hargobind Sahib's time, the Akal Takht once again became the socio-political and military decision-making place of the Guru. Now, however, the Guru was both Guru Granth Sahib and the Sikh people as a whole, the Guru Khalsa Panth. And so twice a year, and when needed, the Khalsa would gather at Akal Takht and make decisions through consensus-based decision-making in a legislative body known as the Sarbat Khalsa. Though Maharaja Ranjit Singh halted the Sarbat Khalsa and moved executive decision-making to Lahore, and invested the governing power of the Khalsa within himself, the Panth remained sovereign, and the institution of the Akal Takht remained separate from the Sikh state. This was demonstrated within his own rule, when the Mukh Sevadar of the Akal Takht, Akali Fulla Singh, called Ranjit Singh to Akal Takht as a Tankhaiya for his aberrant behavior. In the post-colonial period, Akal Takht kept its sovereign nature. While the institution was undermined during British rule, when the Akali movement was officially launched and the SGPC was created, it was done through a Panthic meeting at Akal Takht Sahib. Through the 20th century, while the Akal Takht officially fell under the control of the SGPC, it remained a sovereign institution and the center of Sikh political and social sovereignty. This is all to say that the nature of the Harmandir Sahib and Akal Takht Sahib complex is unique. It is not just a quote-unquote religious site, for such a designation is impossible in the Sikh psyche. Instead, the complex is both the spiritual and temporal capital of the Sikh people, and the institution of the Harmandir Sahib and Akal Takht Sahib demonstrate this sovereignty. The twin Nishan Sahibs standing at the side of Akal Takht, called the Miri Piri Nishan Sahibs, further manifests this ideal. For this reason, the complex has been the site of much violence in the post-Guru Gobind Singh Sahib era. The state, be it Mughal, Afghan, British, or Indian, has recognized, rightly, that the complex is not just a spiritual site, but is a physical manifestation of the Khalsa Panth's socio-political and spiritual sovereignty. Thus, when the Sikhs came into conflict with the state, which is quite often, considering the radical nature of Guru Nanak Sahib's vision, the brunt of the state's forces often come down hard on the complex. It has long been a belief of tyrants that to destroy the Sikhs, one must destroy Harmandir Sahib complex. Everyone from Zakariya Khan to Yahya Khan to Ahmed Shah Durrani to Indira Gandhi believed that the path to subverting Sikh power and undermining Sikh sovereignty was to attack the Harmandir Sahib complex. The Sikh response to violence against the complex. Considering that the state has often targeted the Harmandir Sahib complex, what can we learn from Sikh history about the Sikh response to the violence? I will examine 5 events from the 18th century. Despite colonization and neocolonialism, there has been remarkable consistency in the Sikh response to interference and violence at the Harmandir Sahib complex. The first instance of violence at the complex actually occurred during the time of Guru Gobind Singh Sahib. In 1699, soon after the revelation of the Khalsa, Guru Gobind Singh Sahib sent by Mani Singh with a Jatha of Sikhs to forcibly take control of the complex from the Sordis that were controlling it. The complex had fallen into the hands of the descendants of Prithi Chand, the elder brother of Guru Arjan Sahib, to whom Pargadas gave the title Minnas, or rascals. The Minnas controlled the complex and used it for their self-aggrandizement. After the creation of the Khalsa, Guru Gobind Singh Sahib decreed that Sikh Sangats should overthrow the Masands and instead govern themselves. As a part of this larger project, Guru Sahib decided to free Amritsar from the control of the Minna Masands. Sikh history tells us that control of the complex was not given willingly, and that the Khalsa had to fight to drive the Minnas out. So we see here already, 300 years before 1984, a precedent where violence is used at the complex. In this case, the militant response is being exercised by the Khalsa against usurpers who had taken over the central Sikh institutions from the community. Bhai Mani Singh would remain connected to the Harmandir Sahib complex for the rest of his illustrious life. After the death of Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, Mata Sundri and Mata Sahib Devankor sent him to run the complex and organize the community. This occurred in 1721. For the next decade and a half, Bhai Mani Singh acted as the Mukh Sevadar of the Akal Takht and the head Granthi of the Harmandir Sahib. In 1738, Bhai Mani Singh tried to organize the annual Diwali celebrations at the complex. The government used this as a pretext to arrest, torture, and execute him, as well as his wife Mata Sita Kaur and 22 of his students. Bhai Mani Singh's principal stance against government interference in the complex at the cost of his own life demonstrates that maintaining the complex's sovereignty was supreme. After Bhai Mani Singh's martyrdom, the complex fell to the control of the Mughals. The Amrit Sarovar was filled with logs from trees growing around the complex and with the carcasses of animals. Most of the city was destroyed and burnt down, and a large number of Sikhs were taken as prisoners to be executed in Lahore. Massa Rangar occupied the Harmandir Sahib complex. He turned the building into a government office and used the central area of the building, the main Diwan Hall, as the dancing hall. Bhai Mehtab Singh of Mirakot village, Amritsar district, and Bhai Sukha Singh of Marikambo village, Tarn district, joined together. They marched from the deserts of Rajasthan where the Khalsa was camping and pledged to punish Massa Rangar for his sacrilege. They rode their horses up the central gate leading to the bridge to Harmandir Sahib and tied them to a tree that still stands there today. Disguised as tax collectors, they entered Harmandir Sahib. While Sukha Singh kept watch, Mehtab Singh executed Massa Rangar and took his head back to the Khalsa in Bikaner, Rajasthan, as a demonstration of Sikh justice. This occurred in 1740. The execution of Massa Rangar, which occurred within the confines of Harmandir Sahib itself, demonstrates that when violence, even within the sacrosanct location, is the only option left to free the complex of abuse and denigration, the decision is both clear and appropriate. The Sikhs would not get access to the complex until 1748, when the Dal Khalsa, under the command of Sardar Jasta Singh Ahluwalia, defeated Salabat Khan, the Faujdar, local Mughal official of the area, and took control of Amritsar. In order to defend the complex in the future, the Sikhs built a small fort near the Sarovar of Ramsar, about 1 kilometer from the Harmandir Sahib complex. They named it Ram Roni, after Guru Ram Das Sahib. The Sikhs redug the Sarovar, repaired the complex, but just a year later Mir Mannu, the governor of Lahore, attacked the Sikhs, and Harmandir Sahib fell to the Mughals once more. It would not be until Mir Mannu died in 1753 that there would be some respite for the Sikhs and the complex would once again come under Sikh authority. In 1757, Ahmad Shah Durrani, also known as Abdali, the Afghan emperor, invaded India for the fourth time. Sikhs carried out guerrilla attacks against Durrani and his forces, liberating much of his spoils and freeing many of the enslaved people he was taking back to the slave markets of Kabul. Durrani was enraged and wished to destroy Sikhs once and for all. He thought the best way to do this was to attack and destroy the Harmandir Sahib complex. The Sarovar was once again filled with animal carcasses, and this time, to ensure the defeat of the Sikhs, Abdali packed Harmandir Sahib with explosives and blew up the building. This was the first time the structure of Harmandir Sahib, built by Guru Arjan Sahib, was destroyed. The foundation built by the Guru remained. One of Bhai Mani Singh's proteges, now an old man himself, Baba Deep Singh, was based at Damdama Sahib in southern Punjab, where he spent his time as a scholar, teacher, and scribe. Upon hearing of the destruction of the Harmandir Sahib, Baba Deep Singh declared that he would not rest until he had freed the complex from outsider control. With his few students, he started to march to Amritsar, 220 kilometers away. Along the way, Sikh villagers who were not professional soldiers joined him and pledged themselves to his cause. Baba Deep Singh was mortally wounded, but his forces managed to defeat the Afghanis under the command of Durrani's general, Jahan Khan, and freed the complex. The spot where Baba Deep Singh's head landed on the Prakarma of Harmandir Sahib is memorialized to this day with a small gurdwara that marks the spot. The story of Baba Deep Singh, who sacrificed everything to free the complex from Afghan control, is significant in understanding Sant Jarnail Singh's actions in 1984. The Sant was the head of the Damdami Taksal, which traced its origins back to Baba Deep Singh, so he saw himself as sitting on Baba Deep Singh's seat. The historicity of this is not the issue. It is just the fact that the Sant fervently believed this. 7 years later, Ahmad Shah Durrani invaded India again, his seventh invasion of the subcontinent. The Sikhs held a Sarbat Khalsa and decided to return to the jungles to be able to attack the Afghan emperor using their guerrilla tactics. However, the Sikhs had not wholly abandoned the complex. 30 Sikhs, under the command of one of Baba Deep Singh's proteges, Baba Gurbaksh Singh Nahang, had volunteered to remain at the complex to defend it. The story of Baba Gurbaksh Singh and his 29 compatriots is integral to our understanding of the events of 1984. Why did the Khalsa leave just 36 behind to defend the complex? What was the point of this tiny group against a force of tens of thousands of Afghani soldiers? The issue was a matter of principle. While it made strategic sense for the Khalsa to retreat from Amritsar, they could not give up control of the complex without putting up a fight. A foreign army could not enter the complex and take control of it without Sikhs fighting back, even if this fight was against overwhelming odds. Baba Gurbaksh Singh had volunteered to stay behind to demonstrate to the Afghanis that Sikhs would not willingly give up control of their institutions. The 30 defenders of the Harmandir Sahib complex fought bravely against an army of almost 30,000 Afghanis. They did not stand a chance, but they did not surrender. Each one fought to their last breath. According to Sikh historian Bhai Singh Pangu, Baba Gurbaksh Singh Nahang and his compatriots fought for several hours against a vastly superior force. Ahmad Shah Durrani was so frustrated by this show of defiance that he desecrated Harmandir Sahib once again, and once again filled in the Sarovar with animal carcasses. It is entirely possible that had Baba Gurbaksh Singh not been there and fought back against the Afghanis, the Afghan army would have simply left the Harmandir Sahib complex and not destroyed it. It was the act of fighting back, it can be argued, that led to the complex being damaged and destroyed. However, principle is more important than buildings. Buildings can be rebuilt. Brick, marble, and gold can be replaced. Sovereign principles cannot. It is just as Jarnail Singh famously said, "I do not consider the death of the body to be a real death. It is a death of principle that is the true death." A monument Gurdwara to Baba Gurbaksh Singh stand behind the Akal Takht to this day. The complex would be free of conflict from 1765 onwards once the Khalsa Sultanate was achieved, which in turn was replaced by the Empire Sarkari Khalsa of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. The next time the complex would see conflict was after British colonization in 1846. These incidents from the 18th century demonstrate that violence within the confines of the Harmandir Sahib complex is not a rare event, and according to Sikh history, it is often necessary to defend the complex from invasion and occupation. In Guru Nanak Sahib's radical vision of Ik Oankar, the one creative and pervasive force, there is no division between sacred and non-sacred space. For the Gurus, all spaces contain the divine. Harmandir Sahib, in theological terms, is no more sacred than any other place in the world. Sikhs reject both the Vedic and Islamic ideas of particular places being more pious than others. That is not to say that the Harmandir Sahib complex is not important. It is a place of deep reverence for the Sikh community and afforded much respect. However, according to Sikh ideals, the notion that a location is somehow so sacred that violence should be avoided there does not make sense. Not only does sacred space not exist, but a militant response is in no way, in the Sikh tradition, profane. According to Sikh principles, a militant response is necessary and a responsibility. It is immoral in the Sikh tradition to turn away from violence when the need for an armed response emerges. As Guru Gobind Singh Sahib famously put it in his letter to Aurangzeb, the Zafarnama Sahib, when all other means have failed, it is just to take up the sword. Therefore, the Harmandir Sahib complex is not a pure place where any violence would be considered sacrilegious. Instead, it is a place where militant response is often needed to protect Sikh principles, institutions, and ideals. Having explained why a militant response within the complex is not problematic within a Sikh context, let us extend our argument to the fortifications of the complex. Fortifying the complex. General Santbir Singh was a master of guerrilla warfare and was pivotal in the Bangladeshi War for Independence from Pakistan. He joined Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale as a member of the movement during the Tarmiyad Morcha. In preparation for the inevitable invasion of the Indian Army on the complex, Santbir Singh set about creating fortifications and coordinating positions for fighters to fight from. Was the active fortification of the complex contrary to Sikh tradition and principles? Sikhs of the 18th century understood the need to fortify the Harmandir Sahib complex. They had built the fort of Ramroni about 1 kilometer from the complex to defend it. The fort was later developed by Sardar Jassa Singh, who became so synonymous with the fort that his entire missile, and into present times his entire caste, are given the title of Ramgariyas. Later in the 18th century, Sardar Jassa Singh Ramgariya built 2 large towers and a fort on the Parkarma of Harmandir Sahib. These towers and the fort between them were built to protect the complex from attack. The building and tower still stand on the eastern side of the Parkarma, the walkway around Harmandir Sahib, and is called the Ramgariya Bunga. Therefore, fortifying the complex was not a modern phenomenon, but a concern for Sikhs in the 18th century. As a place that was the focus of so much government oppression, fortifying the complex was and remains a necessity. General Santbir Singh was not doing anything counter to Sikh tradition, but instead was following in the footsteps of the great missile leader Sardar Jassa Singh Ramgariya. Weapons in a temple. One common justification for the government's attack in June of 1984 is to show images of Sikhs with firearms in the complex during the Tarmiyad Morcha. The argument being that there were extremists or terrorists in the complex that the government needed to remove. Was it wrong, according to Sikh tradition, history, and scripture, to have weapons in the Harmandir Sahib complex? This is perhaps the easiest critique to refute. Weapons hold a central place in the Sikh tradition. In fact, weapons sit on the throne at Akal Takht Sahib, representing the divine's creative power, justice, and wisdom. These historical weapons from the Gurus and famous Sikhs from the 17th and 18th century are a source of veneration in Akal Takht Sahib. These weapons are authentic tools of war that were used in battle by figures like Guru Hargobind Sahib, Guru Gobind Singh Sahib, Baba Deep Singh, and Sahibzada Baba Ajit Singh. For those who might argue that there is a fundamental difference between cutting-edge weapons and firearms, The fact that there are two pistols in Akal Takht Sahib belonging to Guru Hargobind Sahib and Baba Deep Singh demonstrates that firearms are treated as any other weapon in the Sikh ethos and that historically there was never any issues with firearms within the complex. The Gurus are known to have used pistols and rifles. Thus, the rifles and Sten guns of the Sikhs in 1984 were no different than the pistols carried by Guru Hargobind Sahib 400 years ago. Besides, Baba Jarnail Singh and his followers' weapons in 1984 were hardly sophisticated. They lacked ammunition and mainly used guns from the World War II era. The army greatly surpassed them in terms of firepower. The fact that they could hold out for so many days and stop one of the world's largest armies is a testament not to their weaponry, but to their dedication and courage. Surrender. As explained above, Sant Jarnail Singh Khalsa Bhindranwale would not have surrendered once the battle had begun, due to his promises in front of Guru Granth Sahib and the Akal Takht Sahib. The Sant saw himself as someone with the legacy of Baba Deep Singh and Baba Gurbaksh Singh Nahang to live up to, meaning once the battle had begun, there would be no option but to fight to the end. Above all of these concerns was the fact that the Sant took the principle of upholding the sovereignty and sanctity of the Harmandir Sahib complex as paramount. Lieutenant General S.K. Sinha, who served as Vice Chief of Army Staff, was initially tasked by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi to plan the attack on the Harmandir Sahib complex. He refused to plan the attack as he believed a political solution was the only viable option, and was forcibly retired because of his refusal. He states that Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale had no choice but to defend the complex from attack. Quote, in view of these military preparations, if Sant Bhindranwale and his men decided to defend the Golden Temple with all their might and means, no one can and should blame them. You are duty-bound to do all you can when you know someone is going to raid your house. In this case, the house was the holiest Sikh shrine in the world. End quote. Even a highly decorated officer of the Indian Army could understand why Sant Jarnail Singh had to defend the Harmandir Sahib complex. More than that, Sinha's statement shows that the only sane and just response was the one that the Sant took. A more fundamental reason often ignored when discussing 1984 is that the Sant could not have surrendered before or during the attack. Simply put, in June of 1984, Sant Jarnail Singh was not a wanted man. There was no arrest warrant out for him, and by the standards of the Indian government he was a free citizen without any criminal charges. In fact, Sant Jarnail Singh had been charged with murder in 1982 and had willingly given himself up for arrest. Due to a lack of evidence, he was set free from holding, and the courts did not follow up on the charges. Why then would he have surrendered if the government had not charged him with any crimes, and he was a free man at the time of the June 1984 attack on the Harmandir Sahib complex? Despite all the claims by the government and the Indian press that the Sant was a terrorist, there was not one criminal case lodged against him at the time of the June attack on the Harmandir Sahib complex. According to the Indian government, he was an innocent man. A field of battle. A new critique of Sant Jarnail Singh and his armed presence in the Harmandir Sahib complex has emerged in the past 10 years. This critique is often leveled by those who follow the Nahang tradition and greatly idolize the controversial Sikh figure Santa Singh Nahang, the man who was head of the Buddha Dal Nahangs in 1984. Because he collaborated with the Indian state both before 1984 and in the immediate aftermath of the attack, Santa Singh was excommunicated from the Khalsa Panth in the summer of 1984. Contemporary supporters of Santa Singh wishing to rehabilitate his image often justify his collaboration in various ways. The point of this paper is not to counter these claims, so I will not delve into them except to refute one specific claim that has become increasingly common. Followers of Santa Singh state that Baba Jarnail Singh should have fought the Indian army elsewhere, not in the Harmandir Sahib complex. Without any historical evidence, they claim that Santa Singh offered Sant Jarnail Singh to act as a liaison between himself and the government to organize a battle at a different location, often stated to be Anandpur Sahib. This presumably is meant to have saved the Harmandir Sahib complex from an attack. 1984 was not the 16th century when armies would meet on a battlefield and a victor would emerge. This was not a battle between two opposing armies, but between an army and a force of about 200 brave Sikh warriors. The government intended to attack the Harmandir Sahib complex. Sant Jarnail Singh being there or not, the government's goals were clear. They had planned the attack months in advance, from the very start of the Tarmir Morcha. They chose the timing of the attack carefully to inflict maximum civilian casualties. Ignoring the fact that the Sant had pledged before the Guru to remain in the complex and all the reasons why he could not easily leave the complex, the idea that the government would allow him and his followers to choose the place of battle and then go to war like feudal fighters is absurd. This argument betrays a lack of basic logic, and those who make it are either knowingly making a bad faith argument or somehow lack an understanding of the nature of warfare in the 20th century and a basic understanding of history. The battle at the Harmandir Sahib complex in June of 1984 followed a decades-long pattern of harassment and discrimination by the Indian state, which had begun before partition. It was a culmination of systematic demonizing of Sikhs in general and the Sant in particular. Like the 18th century attacks on the complex, it was an attempt to silence and destroy Sikh social and political activism. It was a brutal siege and a bitter fight to defend the complex, and it could not have somehow, magically, taken place hundreds of kilometers away. Use of questionable language. There are two recorded instances where Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale used controversial language in regards to Hindus. In the first instance, he threatened to kill 5,000 Hindus if detained buses containing members of the Sangat, the Sikh congregation, were not released. In the second instance, on 1 December 1983, he stated that if Sikhs were forced out of other parts of India, the Hindus of Punjab would suffer the consequences. Let us look at both events in more detail to understand their context and Sant Jarnail Singh's response. In the first situation, buses had been detained. The Sangat in these buses had travelled to celebrate the death anniversary of Sant Singh Bhindranwale, the head of the Mehta Chowk branch of the Damdami Taksal before Sant Jarnail Singh, who was also Payan Meek Singh's father. Mata Lab Kaur, the very elderly mother of Sant Singh, was included on the bus. The buses had been detained without cause or explanation. Sant Jarnail Singh was incensed by this detention and harassment of the Sangat, especially his mentor's mother. He made a public statement that if the buses were not released within a certain number of hours, 5,000 Hindus would die. If our bus is not returned by 5 o'clock, I shall kill 5,000 Hindus in 1 hour, he said. The buses and their Sangat were promptly released. Did Sant Jarnail Singh actually plan to kill 5,000 innocent Hindus? At a later date, he said he had no intention of following through on the threat, but knew that this would be the fastest way of ensuring that the buses were released. In the second situation, an extremist Hindu group called the Jai Hindu Sangh in the state of Rajasthan threatened to force out all Sikhs of Rajasthan from the state. Sant Jarnail Singh responded by saying that if, quote, Sikhs were uprooted from any part of the country, it would be done at the cost of Hindus in Punjab, end quote. This incendiary statement was made in response to a threat, intending to assure extremist Hindu groups that there would be consequences if Sikhs were killed or harassed in other states. In reality, Sant Jarnail Singh was not anti-Hindu in the least, and in many instances had cordial relations with Hindu leaders. He relays several incidents in his speeches where Hindus came to him for assistance. He abhorred violence against civilians and condemned any targeted killings of any community. These statements, while unsavory, were made tactically to ensure the safety of Sikhs. Sant Jarnail Singh was a principled individual who epitomized Sikh values. He was a man who was fully committed to Shabad Guru, the wisdom of Guru Granth Sahib, and deeply connected to Nam, identification with the Divine One, and Bani, wisdom of the Gurus. He was an excellent human being, but not perfect. In the Sikh ethos, only the Guru and Kartar of the Creator are perfect. In fact, Sant Jarnail Singh would repeatedly stress that he was flawed and not near perfect or infallible. Again and again in his speeches, he admonishes people when they call him a Brahmgyani, one who has deep knowledge of the divine, a title of respect given to saintly Sikhs. Quote, For this reason, pray to the Guru that the true king, Guru Granth Sahib, give me the opportunity to dust the shoes of the congregation, that he give me faith in Guru Granth Sahib, his own form, so that, living as a Sikh, keeping the 5Ks, I can serve the Panth. You should just say this prayer for me. Just saying empty words of praise causes me a lot of hurt. With folded hands, prostrating myself on the ground, I appeal to the spokesperson that it is not a sin to say this, to call someone a Brahmgyani about a great man who might come to the stage, but it is not proper to use these words for an insignificant person like me. Another instance demonstrating the humility and humanity of Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale is found in M.S. Diora's Akali Agitation to Operation Blue Star Volume 1. Quote, an ultimatum was given by Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale to publisher come author of a book to withdraw from the market a book published by him in praise of the Sant. Mr. Bhindranwale objected to his characterization in the book as a Dharm Raksha, protector of the Dharm. Dharm Rakshak, protector of Dharm. In the ultimatum, Mr. Bhindranwale stated that Guru Gobind Singh alone could be described as defender of Dharm, and that by using the term for him, the Sant, the author had indirectly insulted the great Guru as well as brought the Sant into contempt. The publisher should stop circulation of the book and seek an apology. I included these two quotes to demonstrate that Sant Jarnail Singh was not perfect, which he readily acknowledged. The two statements about Hindus that he made were not ideal, and it can be said that they did not completely reflect Sikh values. It is a fair critique to point out that these statements were inflammatory and discriminatory. However, consideration is also needed for the circumstances that prompted these tactical statements. In addition, it is impossible that every statement made by Sant Jarnail Singh would be free of fault or critique. He was a fallible human being, and it can be said that these two instances demonstrated this fallibility. Nonetheless, he was a man fully committed to the Sikh ethos. From critiques to empowerment. All of the critiques discussed in this article are predicated on the belief that to some degree the blame for the Kalukara of 1984 should not be placed just at the feet of the Indian government, but that there were two sides and both were to blame for how the events of June 1984 played out. There is a logical fallacy in this belief, in that the events of 1984 have been demonstrated not to be an aberration of Sikh-India relations, but instead were the end goal of a multi-decade-long process that began before partition in 1947. While Sikhs have never been passive participants in their own history, a fair reading of 1984 demonstrates clearly that the government was responsible for the aggression leading up to the attack and for the attack itself. These criticisms of Sant Jarnail Singh and his followers in June of 1984 betray a desperate desire to make sense of June 1984 without facing up to the straightforward and historically verifiable fact that the responsibility for the attack lies at the feet of the Indian government and its leader Indira Gandhi. These critiques are an attempt to mitigate this guilt somehow, to spread the blame from the government to the Sant as well. These explanations are not simple. They cannot be easily encapsulated in a list or a quick soundbite, but this does not make them any less accurate. These explanations require an understanding of Sikh history and traditions. One needs to know about Baba Gurbaksh Singh Nahang, Jassa Singh Ramgarhia, and the Punjabi Suba Morcha to understand why Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was in the Harmandir Sahib complex, why he was armed, why he fortified the complex, why he did not surrender, and why the battle could not have taken place somewhere else. When viewed from the long-term perspective of Sikh history, the actions of Sant Jarnail Singh in 1984 bear remarkable similarities with the beloved and celebrated Sikh figure Baba Deep Singh. For this reason, many segments of the global Sikh population celebrate him fervently. For those who are uncomfortable with Sant Jarnail Singh and feel that he is to blame even partially for what happened in 1984, there is a need to be self-reflective and critical. One must ask oneself, why is it so difficult to assign blame where it should rest, with the Indian government? There is a need to challenge oneself to try and understand what occurred in 1984 through a Sikh lens, and not fall prey to disinformation and propaganda. An understanding of 1984 through a Sikh framework is a must, so that the Sikh community can learn from what occurred in 1984, so that it can celebrate the brave warriors who defended the Harmandir Sahib complex and commemorate all those who were martyred in the 1984 Kalukara. Thank you for listening. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
You were listening to Sikhcast by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.